So today's star lecture is given by Professor Tiina Rosenberg. And Tiina is a professor of theatre studies and also a gender scholar. And she has been a professor of gender studies at Stockholm University and at Lund University, and has written extensively on performing arts, feminism, and queer theory. So this lecture today is an introduction to contemporary Sweden, both cultural and social life, and gives you some insights in the country you have chosen to study in. So I will now leave the floor to Professor Tiina Rosenberg.
Thank you for your introduction and welcome to Stockholm, everybody. I have called this lecture for Swedophiles. I'm just going, in a few minutes, going to explain to you what it means, but I just wanted to welcome you and say that I actually came as a guest student to Stockholm University for some 30 years ago. It was not quite, it wasn't any summer school. I just came over as a regular student. And today when I'm talking about Swedish culture and society, so I'm not doing that as a Swede. I'm coming from the neighboring country, Finland, Helsinki, and in a global perspective, it's of course not so very far away from here. But in a certain kind of sense, and when time flies, so in a sense, so there might be still something about being somebody else in somebody else's country. I didn't start out at Stockholm University once upon a time. I had studied first Germanics in Switzerland and in Germany, and then I switched to Stockholm University and studied comparative literature, theatre and performance studies and cinema studies here. And then I ended up as a professor in gender studies, and I have just returned after many years now back to one of my home disciplines, performance studies. So why I'm telling this to you is that when you are in a situation, when you're a master student or a student at advanced level, even if you go to graduate school, is that you have an idea that you're studying one topic, that you are in, so to say, in your home discipline. But a lot of academic lives actually don't really turn out to be in that way these days. You might end up in something completely different. You start out as something, and then in the end, and in the meanwhile, while you are doing that something, so there might be something else coming up. So calling myself a Swedophile, it simply means that you're fond of Sweden. And I understand that it was not the weather that brought you here. It's the weather is always terrible in Northern Europe. It can be fine, and when it's fine and nice, then everybody goes out, because there is a certain kind of euphoria about the beautiful weather, and about the beautiful weather in Scandinavia means always the sun. If you live or come from very sunny and dry cultures where the rain is exotic, then you might think that this is quite the thing to be in a rainy country. But anyways, Swedophilia is a condition where you get excited upon the mention of Sweden, or Sverige, as you might prefer to call it, even if you don't speak Swedish. So Sweden is called Sverige in Swedish. And everything that goes with it, such as culture, languages, music, fashion, food, nature, brands such as ABBA, IKEA, or H&M. I'm coming back to these things. Why I like personally Sweden, and I'm not sent out here by the Swedish state or anything. So this is not even an outburst of any kind of nationalism. But I think Sweden is cool. It's modern, it's connected, and full of contradictions, of course, like any other country in the world. But first of all, I think that Sweden is the main contradiction in Swedish history might be the so-called Swedish model. And I saw that one of your courses, actually some of you are taking that course. I don't know if those of you are sitting here right now, but some of you are studying the so-called Swedish model. And the so-called Swedish model is the welfare state. And it's this a little obscure connection of having a kingdom, and this is the royal family you have here, and then having the tradition of the social democracy, which was from the very beginning an idea of a democratic socialism emanating out of the labor movement, and then it turned out to be a more social liberal kind of social democracy that today, with a different kind of political leadership that Sweden has been taken on for the last 6 years, has turned right in a certain kind of sense. But in the backbone of the Swedish nation, there is a tradition of thinking in terms of social equality. So this connection, or one of the main contradictions, is something that a lot of foreigners always ask about, that how come that you have the king and the queen? And I say, well, listen, I'm not personally responsible for that, because I never decided on personal terms to have that kind of country. But this is one of these things that, on the other hand, you have the very solid tradition of social democracy and the working people, one would say, or even the working classes on the other side, and then you have the aristocracy. And in terms of class, in terms of social class, and depending a little bit where you come from, how diverse the groups are, or how your own national background looks like. So this is one of these contradictions, but also something that is very typical for the Swedish model is the situation of negotiation. A sense of consensus and negotiation, that you sit down and you talk to people, and even if you have conflicts, political conflicts, and you might have conflicts around other topics. So the main thing, and this is a piece of an advice for you who are new to Sweden, or some of you at least, I don't know, maybe you have been here many times before, but those of you who are now new to Sweden, don't ever express any conflicts right forward or very frankly. Try to think about that. That's not a way of dealing with conflicts in Sweden. Dealing with conflicts in Sweden is to pretend that they don't exist. Or if you talk about them, then you have to do that in a very consensual or in a very negotiating way, where you always give space to the other one, to your partner, or even somebody who is against or opposing your opinion. So this, the Swedish model of consensus, of having the kingdom on the one hand, having the tradition, the very solid tradition of social democracy on the other hand, is in structural terms also an image of a country where people are used to negotiate, and where actually heavily pointed or heavily kind of emphasized social conflicts just don't belong to a good Swedish style of everyday life, if you understand what I mean. So this would be my advice, point one. Of course, you're welcome to express anything you wish, so that's not a question, and that's not the thing I'm trying to tell you. It is just how to put your opinions, or how to kind of bring your issues forward. Mind that way and style of talking about things. And then we go into something else. Many of you, and those of you who are interested in Sweden, and a lot of people who come to Sweden, they do study children's literature, but also Pippi Longstocking is one of those main characters, even for the translation of Swedish children's literature, also into other languages. Inger Nilsson, who was the Pippi in the 60s, impersonating one of the first TV productions, TV series of Pippi Longstocking, is a famous face for many of us who actually belong to that generation who watched this in those early days or days of Swedish television. But I would say that Pippi Longstocking, as an eccentric, super strong, red-headed and very strong-headed young woman or girl, is also a model of a very anarchist kind of living. Do you know Pippi Longstocking? Is Pippi Longstocking familiar to you as a character? Also Astrid Lindgren as an author. Author is interesting and her books. And what is interesting also is if you go into the translation history of her books, in what countries throughout the world or in a global perspective, what are the most beloved characters by Astrid Lindgren in different countries? In most of the countries, and so in Sweden, it's Pippi Longstocking. And I would say that this is one of these things I really do like about Sweden, that it's a very good country for women. In a sense that it's not only Pippi Longstocking who is not only an eccentric and a strong young woman, but she is also somebody who is without parents. The parents have died, and she is as an orphanized child. She has this money left from her father's side, and it turns out that the father is not dead at all. But that's another story. But there is also something about independency. There is also something about this character that mind in actually doing things in your own way. And I think that Pippi Longstocking is an extraordinary character in children's literature in a sense that there is a certain kind of melancholia always in a child who lives by herself, but there is also a lot of strength and independency. So in a certain kind of way, when we were watching at the royal family and at the labor union or the social democratic kind of image of imaginary in the first place. So this is also one of those images or icons of Swedish youth culture or children's literature that is not only something for children. I think this also goes in many ways in this eccentric manner for Swedish women, or the idea how women are thought in this country. And it's not only the social democracy, it's also the women's movement or a feminist movement that has been and that still is very strong in Sweden in different ways. And Pippi Longstocking might not be the only icon, but this is also something about having this very eccentric and very individualistic, but on the other hand also a young woman who acts in solidarity with her friends. This might be more for your generation, right? If you go back to Inge Nilsson, who was acting in the first Swedish TV production of Pippi Longstocking. So this would be now the Pippi Longstocking for contemporary cinema and literature. Noomi Rapace, who acts as Lisbeth Salander, as the hacker heroine of Stieg Larsson's thriller books. And The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is the first one. There are three of these films, and I know that many of you have both read and seen the films. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo comes out of the big tattoo this Lisbeth Salander character has on her back. Actually, the Swedish title for the first book, but also for the first film in these trilogy, in these three films, it says "Män som hatar kvinnor," men who hate women. So it's not at all Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. It is actually about abusive male behavior against women. These three books are about violence against women and the revenge that Lisbeth Salander, who has been this abused child in many ways, both by her father, but also later on when she has been under certain kind of state power and control, and now she decides to hit back. So she is one of those revenging young women who becomes this dark black angel in this punk style, as you can see here on this picture. If you haven't read the film, read the books or seen the films, so you can easily go to the next video store or DVD store and rent them. So I would say that together with Pippi Longstocking, who is one of those traveling icons of Swedish literature, so we have Lisbeth Salander, who is the modern, a modern kind of woman who takes the destiny in her own bare hands and fights back. And this is one of those traveling images or icons that have emanated through the last years. The film was out 2009, and then also the Hollywood version of it. I actually prefer the Swedish version to the Hollywood one. Not that I would be against Hollywood. That's not the thing. I mean, that is not my point here. But there is something about the American version of Lisbeth Salander and the Swedish version of the same character that are not quite translatable. There is in the first film, there is one of the sex scenes where Lisbeth Salander actually she's bisexual, and actually in the beginning of the film, living together with a woman, but she occasionally also has sex with men. And when she has sex with the male journalist, so in the Swedish film, it is she actually who leads the sex scene and stays upon him. In the American version, she is turned back on her back, actually, in this position of submission, and that was actually not a thing in the Swedish film. And I think that, okay, it's interesting to see also in the West, where sexuality or where sex acts are today communicated in different ways, but there is still something about a woman who actually takes the lead in that kind of heterosexual sex scene situation, where she actually in the Swedish film is the dominating one, and in the Hollywood version she is not. It might be a footnote, but I still think as a feminist researcher that this still is a point, that if you have somebody who looks like this, who also through her looks, her image and the whole style, the bodily style of the kind of punk princess, or the revenging angel, the black angel, then you can think that this would be the woman or the young woman who would be very submissive in having sex. So this I thought was really the strength of communicating young woman power in the Swedish film version. Then the other one is music. A lot of bands or a lot of music artists today are global in a sense, because they do sing in English and are basically translatable in very different contexts. So you might not think about them as national or coming from smaller nations or from national music contexts. The singer Robin is one of them. You can hear her if you go out to different, I think that she's going to give a concert this summer also in Stockholm. But she's one from the music business today in Sweden that is very dominated by women. Of course, not only by women artists, but basically rock music, but also pop music, where from the very beginning the privilege, especially the image of a rock singer with the guitar as a kind of phallus symbol. So before, those of you who might remember the Riot Girls movement and really reclaiming the guitar, but also reclaiming the space on stage, how to take space on stage, how to reclaim the guitar not only being the boys' instrument, but also something for the girls and the music industry. So basically a lot of women artists also in Sweden, not only globally, but also in Sweden, have been in the genre of the singer-songer kind of tradition of having your acoustic guitar and performing and singing your songs. But there are also many of them today in rock music. This is, I would say, Robin would be in the tradition of rock, but also pop, in a certain kind of mix. But also she's one of those icons who became iconized or famous already when she was in her teens. So she comes out from a theater family. Both her parents are directing and acting within opera and theater, and she started to sing and perform at early age. And I don't think she's around 30 today, but she started out. I think she had her first hit when she was 16 or something like that. So watch out for Robin, but watch out for things also that have to deal with music if you want to go out, because I guess that you're going to do your studies, and because it's going to rain anyway, so you can't be outdoors. So be outdoors. So look for music. There are a lot of music spots. You will find live music in clubs and places, but there are also music festivals coming on in Stockholm, so you don't have to go that far away if you look for music. And that doesn't only mean that there are only Swedish artists around, but entertainment in the evening is the thing, I would say. Then those of you who come from Europe know the European Song Contest, and those of you who don't have a European background might not. This is a thing that we would really discuss European politics through singing. It's a very strange tradition that the European countries created for some 50 years ago after the post-war, during the post-war period, and this was from the very beginning only for the so-called in the Cold War Europe, only for the West. So only Western Europe, Western and Northern and Southern Europe could take part in this very specific kind of song contest, where I wouldn't even say that it's a pop. It's a kind of, that is in German and in Swedish called Schlager tradition, and Schlager actually doesn't translate into English. It's not exactly the same thing that a hit, because having a hit is not exactly the same song as the same type of song as Schlager is. Schlager is a popular song that is a hit, but it's in a very popular way, and you have basically these songs in all European countries. After 1989, when the Berlin Wall went down symbolically, so a lot of when the former Eastern European countries became a part of both of the European Union, but also the European Song Contest, so a different kind of picture emerged. So if you think that a song is only a song, then I think that you have to think twice, because it's interesting. You're performing your song, but at the same time, it's very interesting what kind of songs, traditions, and artists are actually circulated within the European Song Contest. But it's also an interesting, I think personally, as a scholar within the field of cultural studies, so it's interesting to see how the different countries vote. So we have a lot of territorialization going on in this song contest, how people vote, and former and actual enemies, countries that have been in war with each other, all of a sudden vote for each other because for their neighboring countries, etc., etc. So this is a whole world of fans and fandom. So if you're interested in that, so you can check that out on the internet. There are people who have also written their doctoral thesis about the European Song Contest from a post-colonial perspective, to see how ethnicity and how the different kind of territorialized relationships play out in these. But anyway, Sweden has won. Sweden has won for 5 times now, and the latest was now Loreen, Euphoria, which is going to be the song you're going to hear the most wherever you go. You go to a bar, you go to a store, or wherever you go, and it's not only in Sweden, because they're performing it all over Europe or playing it all over Europe at present. So if you hear the Euphoria now, so you know that's Loreen, and Loreen just won the European Song Contest, and she's also going to be around and perform the hit throughout the summer. But if we go back, I don't going to tell you about all these 5 winning songs, but these might be one of the brands that really put Sweden on the map at the time in 1974. And the interesting story about ABBA was that this kind of music and Waterloo, which is also, you can do a whole lot of analysis of that song, of the lyrics, but also of the musical style of ABBA. Because this was so completely awkward and so out of any kind of cultural context during the 70s. Sweden had a way out different. It was a completely different music culture at the time. It was called the prog, the progressive song movement at the time. And if you go back to the States, if you think of the tradition of Bob Dylan or Joan Baez or the progressive leftist kind of spirit of the time of the late 60s and of the 70s. So all of a sudden you had this very campy and kitsch kind of group of ABBA that landed in a musical landscape, but also in a cultural landscape where they were completely out of context. So this ABBA was in a certain kind of way stigmatized at the time. Nobody really, they made their hits and they started to tour around the world. But in the 80s, they started to disappear and they were almost gone. But they survived actually in a global context in the 90s and especially now in the 2000s when they're really big again. And I think that their survival globally was a question really for the gay culture, because the gay male culture really had the Dancing Queen as their anthem, one could say internationally, really as the favorite tune. And in a sense, when ABBA went underground, coming out of this tradition for the European Song Contest and being very mainstream, even mainstream in a different way, and their disappearance in a kind of cultural landscape was that coming out from this very popular kind of song contest, they disappeared. They became a part of the subculture. And then they popped up again in the 90s and started their revival, one would say, could say, and they became really something and big at the time. But you know, one of the brands, and they are planning to open an ABBA museum in Stockholm. And I would say that also the Mamma Mia, the film, which is not a Swedish production, but it's based on ABBA's music in a production that used to be a stage production about the mother and the young daughter who live in Greece, and they have a history, and their history or their reunion with the possible father of that young girl is the story of the film. So there is really not a story in a dramatic sense, but there are a lot of songs. And Meryl Streep performing the leading lady, the leading prima donna in this very film for a few years ago, 2008, really, I would say, finalized ABBA's comeback in a certain kind of sense, because it was tremendously and incredibly popular, the film at the time, and nobody actually really believed in that it would be that way. But you can see it as a musical, you can also see it as a film, and that's the tune. So that's, so to say, the ABBA tune. This is something that has been connected with Sweden and with Swedish music, and also having it kind of in a global musical mindset. But there is also another part of Sweden. Now we have been talking about Pippi Longstocking, about the eccentric child, young girl. We have the Black Angel and the hacker, the modern heroine of Lisbeth Salander in Stieg Larsson's books and also in films. We have Robin and the celebrated women rock and pop artists. We have Loreen from the European Song Contest, and we have the ABBA tradition. So that is a part of the Swedish tradition that is not very gloomy. The northern countries and I'm not very much for national stereotypes, but there is, of course, something about the Nordic mindset that might be a little gloomy and depressive. That's why I started out with the more colorful or the more kind of lively scene that is also a part of our tradition. But there is also a gloomy part. If you really want to be deep and go down in or deep down into your soul and try to investigate and find out the secrets of human lives. So August Strindberg here is celebrated the anniversary of his death. I mean, he has been dead for 100 years, and this is now something that is all over the place. So you can see films, you can see expeditions, you can go to the theater and see August Strindberg performed everywhere. I mean, he's performed anyway. You don't actually need any anniversary for that. But this is one of those classical names that to be remembered. It's not as colorful as ABBA, and it's perhaps not so strong-headed when it comes to the women characters like Pippi and Lisbeth Salander, but it's still there and worth to take a look if you're interested. Ingmar Bergman, the famous Swedish film director, but also a stage director, is also somebody who has gone global. I mean, Miss Julie by August Strindberg is one of the most performed plays globally. It's not only a famous play by Strindberg, but it's also, as production-wise, an important play in the global repertory, especially in the Western theaters. Ingmar Bergman has been very successful outside of Sweden, especially his films and a lot of psychoanalysis that come into play. Many of his films dealt with violence, domestic violence, with depression, but also with mental illness. A kind of hidden, the most of them, not everything, but a lot of his films were performing or set up in different kind of bourgeois families and talking about the secrets, different kind of family secrets, actually in a tradition of August Strindberg. And Bergman was in the beginning not so very popular in Sweden. He was absolutely loved in Italy, in France, and especially in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, because those places where the psychoanalytic tradition is very strong and people actually used to drink more than we used to use, that has changed now, made his tremendously popular and loved. Today, he's also one of those iconized picture, and if you look at him, so you can also in both these images, especially Ingmar Bergman, see the iconized image of a male artist in this look with this beret basque on his head. So, if you come to IKEA and one of those companies that are really one of those brands where you can see Sweden everywhere. So many of you might not from your home countries think about that also this is something that brings Sweden all over the world. And it's a global enterprise, it's a privately held transnational home company that produces home products and designs and sells ready-to-assemble furniture. And it's a world largest furniture retailer and was started in 1949 by the 17-year-old Ingvar Kamprad. These are the success narratives about people who basically started everything when they were kids. It was like the artist Robin, who was just a singer we were talking about, who also started out at 16, 17. But that was also the Kamprad who started out with IKEA for decades ago. And when I think it's always so strange because going to other countries, and I'm not talking now about the neighboring countries. You can go to Asia, you can go to the States, you can go also to different other places, and all of a sudden you have all this furniture. They have Swedish names, and every piece of furniture and every piece you can buy at IKEA is actually named after a landscape or after something Swedish. And I always thought that was interesting, that if you see the country where you live in kind of iconizing not only the Swedish colors that you have here, the yellow for the sun and the blue for the sky, and you see the whole concept traveling and going global. So it's interesting. Many of you perhaps never thought about that when you were a part of this, or then you have never been a part of this concept. But basically, it is that you put together your furniture when you get home, so you're a part of this production. And the other one is fashion. Fashion has become more and more important in Sweden, and also the Swedish design and fashion designers have become famous in different ways, but this is now the cheaper version of it. H&M, Hennes & Mauritz, but H&M, it's a little differently called in different countries. It's interesting, in one of those cities where I am often, and where I have both studied and being a guest professor in Berlin, so people don't even think that this brand is Swedish, but actually it is. Like IKEA, it produces cheap clothing, and it's also a multinational today retail clothing company, and known for its fast fashion clothing. And it has more than 2,000 stores in 43 countries. Why I'm mentioning these brands are because they are big, because they are multinational, and because they have really gone global. But it's not only the thing, because both IKEA and H&M are those places where the young Swedish economists and lawyers, if they don't want to go further with the academic studies, or if you don't want to go into one of these more state kind of business, then these are the most popular workplaces to look for. So they're very, very popular among young Swedish professionals who want to work for multinational companies, but they also want to work in companies that have a Swedish production code. That means that they have a Swedish production culture and also the Swedish law system that regulates gender equality, but also the rights of lesbian and gay people, for instance, to name one of the reasons, and who brings kind of the Swedish sort of the Swedish model also into the company system, into the company culture. I just mentioned one of these examples. IKEA made a huge advertisement campaign for 2 years ago in Italy, with huge pictures at highways and in the cities, presenting different kind of families. So you had families, like gay families, 2 women together with their kids, or 2 gay men, or you had the straight families, or you had also families where you had single mother or a single father. And there was not only the idea of advertising furniture, but it was also, in a certain sense, like the Italian company Benetton has always done, certain kind of advertisement with an agenda. So the agenda here was that you don't only need furniture, you also need to have a notion of diverse family structures. And this was interesting because it became pretty scandalous, and Italy has, for those of us who have been working in sexual politics now for many years, has very bad sexual politics. It has to do with the Catholic Church, but it also has to do with many other things. It's not the only European country that has. And all of our countries have been struggling with these things. But it was interesting when the Vatican told the company to take those pictures down. And I think that's interesting to see that now, in a certain sense, I feel that I'm defending the company structure or international or Swedish transnational capitalism. I'm not doing that. I'm just as a researcher thinking that it's interesting to see that you can't just put any kind of icons or any kind of labels or any kind of images there because there are ideas about family structure or what kind of nice families should actually live with this kind of nice furniture. And it became a certain kind of political statement. All right. From company structures or from H&M and IKEA were the young Swedish professionals who have gone to business schools want to work to the Drottningholm Court Theatre. If you feel that you have a weekend where you don't know what to do, and if you're interested in cultural heritage, so the whole Drottningholm, where actually the royal family lives, the whole area with the castle and with the Drottningholm Court Theatre, with the park, there is both an English garden and also a 17th century Baroque garden, and there is a very nice cafeteria in the old Chinese style. That was the European fascination during the 18th century for anything exotic. So they built a little, very enchanting little castle in the middle of the woods in Chinese style. If you feel for that, so it's a part of the World Heritage of the United Nations. So if you're interested in that part, I am particularly interested in the Drottningholm Court Theatre. It's I've been working in one of my workplaces. I worked there as a guide, as a student, and then I worked in the Drottningholm Theatre Museum as an assistant in the 80s for a number of years. The thing about the cultural heritage, if you're interested in cultural history, is why Sweden have so many well-preserved both buildings and a lot of staff to put into the museums. It has to do with the fact that Sweden has not had any war for many hundred years now. While the rest of Europe was fighting in the Second World War, which is perhaps the most known of the European wars, and then there have been other wars, more local, and now lately also during the 90s in the Balkans. So Sweden has been very preserved from that kind of destruction. So it means that a lot of things, especially when it comes to the Drottningholm Court Theatre, as one example of a 18th century theatre that is still fully preserved, one of the reasons are that there has been very little territorial damage in Sweden throughout the last, when was the last war? It was for a long time ago, and it hasn't even been a war within this territory. Anyway, Drottningholm Court Theatre is a wonderful place to go to. You can take a guided tour, and in the end of July, they just had a performance, and there was going to be another one for those who are interested in Baroque opera, produced in a very modern way. So if you're interested in this, so you can take a look at that. If you're interested in modern art, so the Museum of Modern Art that was rebuilt in the 90s by the Spanish architect Rafael Moneo, it's also a very fun place to go to. It's at Skeppsholmen, and it's not very far away if you go back to the city center, and you can take a walk or even a bus. Basically, we walk. We are the walking nation, and those of you who come from the US, and I know from my time as a guest professor in the States, so they always said that don't let Tiina decide because that means endless walks. We walk, we use our bodies, we don't just go to the gym, we actually walk on everyday basis, and I think it's very good. So rent a bike, walk, run, do anything. But I mean, this is also getting physical in a city where it's very easy to both breathe and walk and run, so you can do a lot of cultural sightseeing. Moderna Museet has a nice cafeteria, and it has a very good production or collection of contemporary art from the early modernists, from the early in the 20th century up to the present day. And it's really, really worth a visit, even for those of you who are not so very arty, but just if you want to have something to do, and see the city. So it's very nicely located, and it's a good place to go to. And at Skeppsholmen, where the Museum of Modern Art is. So if you get tired of all these Swedish things I have presented now with all the singers and the Drottningholm Court Theatre and Ingmar Bergman and August Strindberg, etc., etc. So Patti Smith, for those of you who are fans, but there are also other artists who come to Stockholm to the Music and Arts Festival in August. In the beginning of August, you can hear and see them there. The idea is that we're going to be outdoors. Well, God knows. We'll see about the weather. If it's raining, then it's difficult, but then there might be other alternatives. But this is also one of those things people do, and this is it's not specifically something Swedish, but that is something people do in most cities, that you go to concerts and you do things, especially in the summer, where you have the possibility, at least partly, to be outdoors. And as my final point is that at the same time, when you have the Music and Arts Festival, you also have the Stockholm Pride Festival, which is the largest one in Northern Europe. There is a Pride Festival also in Helsinki now in June, and there is also another one in Copenhagen and in Oslo. But the Stockholm Pride Festival is a big event, and it's not only party. There is going to be party, and it's for everybody. You don't have to be a member of the LGBTQ community. So it's open for everyone who is interested. And there is a Pride Park where you have a lot of events and especially music and also other events. But there is also a Pride House where you have discussions, political activism, you have a lot of cultural workshops, etc. And part of this program is also in English for those who are interested, those of you who are interested both in sexual politics or in feminist politics or in other questions. Basically, the Pride House collects a crowd that is interested in society as a whole. So that there are a lot of people coming to the discussions who are interested in social and political topics, and it's a very kind of mixed event. So this is something to think about Stockholm, the city where you are now, but also if you have time to do some traveling in Sweden, that is something I don't know anything about. But as a teacher and as a university professor, I know that you're going to be busy with your summer school, and you're going to be busy with your studies, of course. But I just wanted to address a few events, but also things that you have around you in a city that I like a lot. I live in the middle of the city myself. I do my daily exercise, actually in the city center. I never really got tired of Stockholm. I've worked also in other places for 5 years in Lund, in southern Sweden, as a professor of gender studies. I've been a guest professor in Germany. I've been in other places. Now I'm on my way to Greece tomorrow morning for my vacation. From there I'm going to travel to South America to a conference in Santiago, and I'm going to end up in August in India. But I'm always so happy to come back home. And perhaps it has to do with the fact that people say that when one grows old, then you kind of, want to be in a place that you recognize. But I don't know, that might not be the only reason. That when I look out of my window, that I see a familiar landscape, that it's all about that. I think that it's a place, that Stockholm is a city that has a lot of things to offer if you don't ask for the wrong things. So don't ask for the summer, don't ask for the warmth. It's going to come eventually for a few days, and then you have to do like everybody else in the country. Run out that very day, because tomorrow it might be over. And for the rest of the days, my dear friends, you're going to have plenty of occasions to enjoy yourself and just go out and socialize, because that is one of those things that are very easily done in the very city, in this very city. So I hope that you're going to have a great summer school, that you have a great summer, that you feel welcome in Stockholm, and that you can cope with all these contradictions that we all meet everywhere in the world. It is just that they might be very specific Swedish kind of contradictions you meet here. So that was about it, and if you have any questions or something, so I'm here. If you want to address something, or if there is something you would like to know, so please. This was a question about gender equality. Actually, the Swedish women's movement has been strong ever since the late 19th century. The women's movement was growing, or it emerged at the same time, almost at the same time, together with the labor movement, and sometimes they have had connections and sometimes not. So you can go back, and you can go back to the women's movement, but you can also look at the 20th century as a not so noisy kind of revolution, but revolution in a structural sense. The women's movement was organized around different kind of groups, because you have people, liberal feminists, you have had the socialist feminists in the labor movement, you had the academics, and you had the intellectuals. So basically Sweden, the Swedish gender equality is a kind of consensual thing also politically today. So both the left and the right, if you put politics in those terms, and I think you should, because this is actually how the parliamentary landscape looks like, are for gender equality, and this has to do also with the strong feminist presence in many ways. So you have had the lobby groups, but also the structural kind of activism, I would say, that has promoted gender equality in Sweden has to do with the fact that a lot of women from those movements actually went into political parties, and they have worked in tandem together with the Swedish state. In countries where I would take like Germany, if I take Germany as an example, there the women's movement has been, and also the gay movement has been, they have been very autonomous, and they didn't actually work in the sense that they wanted to have the same, not be so strongly connected with the state, because actually they opposed state power in many ways. But in Sweden it has been successful, and I think that the law system today, which is excellent. Then there are always questions about that. If you have the law, it doesn't mean that you don't have sexism and homophobia, etc. But it's there, and that is the structural. That's the structural question that you have to have. You have to have a political agenda, but you have to have these ideas kind of also in the system. And of course there are autonomous groups and people doing other things as well, radicalizing themselves in other kinds of connections or places and spaces. But I think that is one of the main reasons, yes. Some of them decided to be a part of the parliamentary system and part of the state apparatus, and they have been successful, yes. Oh, is there any Danish? You're both from Denmark. You want to have a Finnish person to answer that for Sweden. Okay, but now it's about Scandinavian politics for those of you who are not from Scandinavia. In my generation, in the 70s, the Danish, both the gay movement, now it's the queer movement, but at the time it was gay. But anyway, but in the old gay movement in the 70s and the women's movement in the 1970s, they were extreme. Then Denmark and Copenhagen were really the center in Scandinavia for that sort of political activism. And I remember when I went to school at the time in Helsinki and occasionally visited Copenhagen, so I thought that was the way the Paralyzed looked like, because I thought that was so progressive, so incredibly progressive. What happened in your country, and this is now you ask me as a person, so I think that at the time when the very xenophobic Dansk Folkeparti For those of you who don't know, so that we all have now xenophobic parties in our parliaments, which is actually in these post-social democratic countries a tragedy in our parliamentary system, that we have this racist kind of presence in our parliamentary systems. But in the beginning, nobody really believed that Dansk Folkeparti, which is the Danish version of a racist party, that they would do any damage. So people thought that, okay, you know, they're going to be there, but they don't have any influence. But the thing that I think that the whole turn, the right-wing turn, but also especially the Dansk Folkeparti have been able to do in the Danish parliament is that they gained power, and they have been damaging to the education in gender studies, but also gender equality questions that used to be the Denmark used to have a wonderful tradition. Also human rights, like the Institute for Likestilling, that was also damaged by these people, but also the Institute for Human Rights, and these kind of educational but also political bodies, social bodies that used to be very active in Denmark. So in those years, when I worked in Lund as a professor of gender studies, a lot of Danish students actually came over to study gender studies in Sweden, and that's the structural question. And coming back to your first question about the Swedish women's movement, so the question is that, of course, social movements should be free, and you should be able to organize in the way you want to or wish to. But there is also, the interesting question is also about structures, right? That if you don't have parliamentary system, or if the state is not organized according to a law system, so it gets weaker. And then it's also people struggling with certain kind of rights, they kind of stay outside of that kind of power. So my question is that my answer to you is that it was a huge mistake not to take Dansk Folkeparti seriously from the very beginning. They have done extreme damage. Now the situation have changed, but even if you now have a different kind of political organization, or a parliament looks now different, so the damage that has been done to the Danish system according to gender politics or these kind of questions during the last 10 years, it's pretty permanent. It takes a long time to kind of get back on the track. And what I also think was tragic in Denmark at the time, during the last 10 years, that the intellectuals were so silent, that people got scared because of their jobs, and they really didn't protest. And those of you who come to Europe now from different places, who are outside of the European Union or of the European continent, we have a very bad situation around racism today in Europe, and this is especially connected to Islamophobia these days, and it's not good. It's not good for Europe, and it's not good for the world. And it's certainly not good that we have that now in our systems in different ways. And I would say that Denmark and Netherlands are one of two examples of very progressive countries in the past, in the 70s, and they have a very no such luck today. So that's one of those answers I would give you to your question. It's a personal answer more. So it's for me. It's not for the university or for anyone else. You have a question. I think that we should always be very cautious about ethnic stereotypes. So thinking that somebody who comes from Italy or Spain is in this way, and then somebody coming from Sweden is in that way. So that's one. We could talk about bodily styles or ways of behaving, or the code system, right? The social code. You understand the expression, the notion of social codes. I mean, it's basically how to act in an everyday life situation. It's to be very loud and to take up a lot of space is considered to be vulgar. It's also this kind of showing off, that you show that you're rich, or you take up space, or you do something at the expense of other people, is in the Nordic cultures not really okay. So this is also good to kind of keep in mind, is that you can have a conflict. You don't necessarily have to agree. That's not what I'm saying. It is just coming into a discussion and screaming and shouting and kind of pushing very hard for your point. Might be okay in certain kind of situations, but in most of the situation it's not okay. And it has to do, I think it has to do with a certain kind of rhetorical tradition, but it also has to do with certain kind of tradition in respecting other people. And I don't think that in situations where you can be very loud, that would be a sign of disrespect. It is just that you always, in a Nordic situation, should go around the table and ask everybody for their opinion or about their eventual ideas about certain things. So I think it's more politeness, and it's more a kind of social code system to be aware of. But I don't think it's shyness. It is just that it's not a part of the Nordic tradition to put yourself out there. The self-presentation is more modest. It's considered to be vulgar, that you're kind of taking up the whole air, that you go on until the very moment that the others can't breathe because you have taken up the whole space. So in that sense, it's good to remember. But this is something that goes equal for men and women. So it's not okay that somebody is, no matter if it's a man or a woman, in a seminar situation, for instance, when you're at school or at your summer school, that somebody is constantly talking and the others are silent. That somebody is taking up a lot of space. And then I think it's in every country, don't you not have to be in Sweden, you can be in another country, that you can say that, it's okay that it's not okay that you are talking all the time, because there are also others around the table. So I don't think that it's shyness, it is just a different kind of self-presentation and self-expression. And you will find out when you talk to people. So you can see that. And one of the other things is that not being physically very close to the other people, because then we take a step back. If somebody comes too close, so there is always a bodily kind of distance, right? You don't have to be this far away, but you think about that. That's leave. We are used to space. We don't live in a crowded space, so the Scandinavians can't really cope. It's like for me going to Asia, where you have people everywhere. It's like you can't turn around. We're used to space, and it's and not very urbanized. So give us some space and give us some time, and we'll hang on. Eventually, we have something to say. You try out. You can have it as a social experiment, right? Throughout your stay. Other questions? You mean of the Islamophobia as such is another thing than Islam? Are you asking me about if Islam would eventually... No, Islamophobia, women's... Well, I think it's always dangerous if somebody is discriminated on the basis of religion or gender or sexual orientation or whatever it is. Now we have a lot of bad signs in Europe, or in the West general. I think this also goes for the US, is that when, especially if we take now the European politics, when economy is going down, then you try to find somebody who is the scapegoat of this. And now a lot of immigrant populations have been targeted as as something that would be considered to be bad for the European social body, and that is, I don't think that it's very good. The multiculturalism, but also diversity politics, have been very important for the European democratic politics and being inclusive. Whoever is living within our territories should be welcome to do so, and should be able to participate, no matter what religious beliefs you have. I think it's very dangerous to it's very dangerous to be racist and discriminate people on behalf of anything, and that's not good for Europe, and it doesn't look very good at present because of the ongoing economic crisis, and you can't just pick up certain kind of groups. It was therefore very sad when the German chairman for the Christian Democratic Party and also the Bundeskanzler Angela Merkel in 2010 said that the politics of multiculturalism has that they have completely failed. Multikulti ist absolut gescheitert, she said in German, and that was if a politician at very high level says something like that, it's a very bad sign for the rest of Europe, because the power that goes with that iconized position of being up there, having a lot of political power, and saying that it's not okay, or it's not good for Europe, or it's failed kind of politics to be inclusive and welcoming to people, and welcoming people from with other religious beliefs than Christianity, then I think that we're in a very dangerous position, because I think it's extremely important to be to have diversity politics and to be inclusive and learn to live in a kind of global situation where people have very different kind of traditions, but we still can communicate. I don't think that people are that different from each other, to be frank, in the sense. So I think that Europe, in that sense, the direction doesn't not look very, very good. But of course, there are also other people thinking that it's important to be democratic and inclusive, and I think so too, that it's a way to go. Other questions? Are you happy to be in Stockholm? And no enthusiasm. It's just kind of nodding. You should scream and shout and say, yes, I just told you that we were not normally doing that, but it's a thing. Okay, I think that it's about time for your barbecue, right? So that there is one of the student ambassadors is coming here and picking you up. I wish you a very nice summer school and all the best, and I hope that the weather is also going to, be all shiny and all sunshine, music, and a lot of entertainment, and of course, studies. That's why you're here for. Thank you so much for coming.